Again, my name is Mark Stanford. I'm the Interpretive Ranger at the Battle of Musgrove Mills State Historic Site and here at the Battle of Blackstock State Historic Site. Talk about the battle here today. Hopefully the wind cooperates and doesn't knock everything over again. But I've scheduled out an hour and a half talk, but I don't think it's going to go that long. I haven't done this really formal setting, just sitting here. Most of the times I'm doing the hike, so that takes 2 hours, so I figured an hour tops for the talk probably, I'm hoping, but I gave myself 30 minutes extras just in case. So, let's start off with how did we get here on November 20th, 1780. So we have to go back a month in October of 1780, just after the Battle of Kings Mountain, which is right here, North Carolina, South Carolina border. We are right here currently at Blackstock. This is a major Patriot victory here. The British forces under Major Patrick Ferguson is utterly defeated by the Patriot forces, a combined combination of different militia groups from North Carolina, South Carolina, what we consider Tennessee today, Georgia and Virginia, have all gathered up to fight Patrick Ferguson at Kings Mountain, defeat his loyalist forces there. All his forces are either killed, captured, or have run away. Now this exposes General Cornwallis and the main British army who have just invaded North Carolina, or just started the invasion, just over the border at Charlotte, North Carolina. This exposes his left flank, and this forces Cornwallis now to retreat back into South Carolina and to where Winnsboro is, which is about right here, where he decides to set up his winter camp. Can everybody see the map here? Do I need to move it closer or anything? All right. So Cornwallis has set up his winter encampment here at Winnsboro. Now the British have several main garrisons throughout the backcountry to kind of control the backcountry at this point in the war, in 1780. So the main one in this area, in the 96th district, is of course 96, which is here. Next biggest one, which is now 96, is guarding Cornwallis's left flank as he winters in Winnsboro. Guarding his right flank is the garrison at Camden, South Carolina. And another main garrisons are at Georgetown and Charlestown on the coastal area. Now there's smaller different outposts spread out everywhere in between all these garrisons. Usually they would go to a plantation house of usually a militia colonel is on the Patriot side, seize his house, fortify around it, and put a garrison there. So I don't show where all those are, but in between all these and around are little different outposts and everything. But the main outposts are at 96, Camden, Georgetown, and Charlestown. And in October and early November 1780, Cornwallis is here still at Winnsboro with the main British army there. Now he's there wintering, and he's also waiting for different supplies and reinforcements to come in from the coastal area at Charlestown. Has to cross over, have to cross down and climb up to Camden usually, and then reinforce Cornwallis here at Winnsboro. Now he's running into a problem with the supply lines in that area. There's a man named Colonel Francis Marion, you might have heard of him, called the Swamp Fox, is operating in the area around Georgetown, Charlestown, in between Camden and Georgetown. That is where his main focus is at this point in the war. And Cornwallis knows this, and Marion is making a nuisance of himself at this time. So Cornwallis knows he has to send his best field commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton. Again, everybody probably has seen an image very similar to this of Bannister Tarleton. Young British officer in command of the British Legion, which is a provincial unit, which is our Americans that are trained to fight as professional soldiers for the British. And a legion is a combination force of foot, horse, and cannon. So he has infantry with him, dragoons, which are horsemen. They're dressed very similar to this. Usually carry a carbine and a saber, and he has a 1 3-pounder grasshopper cannon. That's a small little cannon, fires a 3-pound cannonball, about the size maybe of a softball. If you ever go to the National Park at 96, they have one of those in their museum there. It's called the grasshopper gun because when it fired, it liked to hop up off the ground, so they called it the grasshopper gun. So again, he has a combined force of his legion, which is infantry, dragoons, and cannon. He also commands the light companies of the British Army in the South. Now the light companies are again professional British soldiers in the red jackets from Great Britain that have traveled over. Light infantry are usually they travel lighter. They don't have as much gear. They travel. They're supposed to screen the army as it marches. They're supposed to watch out for ambushes, forage for food, and move quickly and fight against the militia wherever they have to. They usually don't fight in those compact lines. They're usually spread out and thinner and skirmish with the enemy. So they're meant to kind of almost like modern soldiers, but not quite there yet. They're still fighting in lines, but they're a little more spread out and using cover to fight. So these are the men that are being sent with Tarleton. So he has, at this point, about 300 infantry and about 200 mounted men. And he is sent from Winnsboro and the Camden area down to try to capture Francis Marion and his men who's up around the Black River area, around King's Tree at this point. So, this is where Tarleton is, early November 1780, late October 1780. So where's Thomas Sumter? So Thomas Sumter, general of the South Carolina militia at this point, has missed the battle at Kings Mountain in October 1780. He was in North Carolina politicking with the exiled South Carolina governor, trying to get command on the entire South Carolina militia. He was in disputes with different commanders, but mainly Colonel James Williams, of who should be in command of all the South Carolina militia. So as he was doing that, farther up in North Carolina, some of his men and many of the men under James Williams and all those other Patriot militiamen fought at Kings Mountain and won a major victory there. Now Colonel Williams is killed at Kings Mountain. He's wounded and dies a couple days later. So now Sumter's rival is out of the way. However, he missed the big victory, and he can't really build on that support yet. He can't take that personal glory because he really wants to be known as the main commander, but he missed the big victory here. However, he is able to use that victory right as the coattail of, because some of his men were there, he uses that to recruit more men. So in the beginning of November 1780, he has about 300 to 400 South Carolina militiamen with him. And they become into the 96th district, in between the Tiger River and the Enoree River. You can't really see it very well on this map, but Tiger River is about right here. Enoree River runs through here. So this area right here where the yellow dots are, pretty much. And his men are gathered in this area, and he begins to send out raiding parties along the Tiger and Enoree River to attack different grist mills and different British outposts along the way, threatening the garrison at 96 here. Probably his ultimate goal is to attack the garrison at 96, but he's still gathering support. He's attacking those grist mills because he knows that General Cornwallis, wintering in Winnsboro, needs the grist mill to feed his army. The grist mills, you grind your corn and your wheat. You can't grind the corn and the wheat, you can't really feed your men. So he knows this, and he's stealing this food along the Tiger and Enoree rivers. Cornwallis also knows this, that he needs those grist mills, and he needs to protect the loyalist population in this area, and he needs to protect the garrison at 96. So he sends a force out to deal with Sumter. This force is under the command of a Major Weems of the 63rd British Infantry, which is the uniform this man's in right here. This is a unique British regular infantry unit. They are regular British soldiers, came over from Great Britain, from England. The regular regiment, trained and paid by the British government. However, these men have been mounted on horseback because the South Carolina militia is well known to be riding their horses into battle, dismounting to fight, and if something goes wrong, they get on their horses and they run away. And the British officers know this. There's different letters and accounts of complaints from the British officers saying we beat the militia all the time, but they get on their horses and they just run away and we can't catch them. So one of the British ideas at the time was to mount some of their infantry to chase after the Patriots. The idea was to chase after them, find them, dismount, to fight like regular British soldiers on the ground. But they got that mobility of men on horseback. So he has about 100 men of the 63rd and about 40 to 50 of the Legion Dragoons that have been detailed with him. So men dressed like this. So about 200 men to go after and attack Thomas Sumter, who he has learned is camping at Fish Dam Ford on November 9th, 1780, which is right here. Now, Weems's plan is to ride from Winnsboro and early in the morning, as the sun comes up, to dismount the 63rd and attack Sumter's camp. However, Weems arrives early, and the sun is not quite up yet, like he wants. However, he sees the campfires of the Patriots, and he decides he's going to attack head on and not wait for the sun, and he decides also not to dismount the 63rd. We remember our regular British soldiers who aren't trained to fight off horseback. They're supposed to dismount to fight. But Weems gets hot-headed and he charges straight in at the Patriot camp. As he does this, he surprises some of the Patriots, and some of them run into the woods on the edges of the camp, but they stop and they turn around and they see all those horsemen silhouetted by the campfires, and they begin to fire at them. And one of those bullets hits Weems, shatters his shoulder, and one goes through his leg, I think, and he falls off his horse wounded. And a handful of more men are killed. However, his second in command, a young lieutenant, was not told the plan of attack, was not told who they were attacking, and was not told the ground they were attacking on. So this young lieutenant of the 63rd, who takes command after Weems is wounded, panics and orders a retreat out of the camp. And he retreats back to Winnsboro and tells Cornwallis of the defeat there. Now Major Weems only loses about a handful of men, but he is also captured by the Patriots. Now he is given parole by Thomas Sumter and is sent on his way, but Sumter uses this victory at Fish Dam Ford to spread word of his coming back to the fight. And he uses this victory to gather even more men to his cause. And Cornwallis knows this. Even though the victory really isn't that big of a thing, a handful of the British were killed, and really half of his men never fired a shot in the Patriot camp because it's the middle of the night, they don't know what's going on. But because he captured Weems and the British retreated, he was able to claim a major victory and use that for recruiting. So by mid-November 1780, Sumter has now gathered not just 500 or 300 to 400 South Carolina militia, he has about 500 to 600 South Carolina and now Georgia militiamen have gathered to him. And he is sending raiding parties out along the Tiger and Enoree River to attack different things. Now after Cornwallis learns of Weems's defeat at Fish Dam Ford, he begins to panic. That was his forces, again, on his left flank, keep getting defeated, and now his left flank is exposed, and 96 is exposed now. So again, he decides he needs his best field commander to deal with this, so he sends word to Banastre Tarleton, who is still chasing Francis Marion through the swamps of the coastal around Georgetown, failing to capture him, orders him to return back to Winnsboro in 96 to deal with Thomas Sumter, because in Cornwallis's eyes, Sumter is the bigger threat right now. Marion can be ignored. And this is supposedly where the famous quote where Banastre Tarleton is recalled and he tells his men, we can't catch this damn fox, and that's where the swamp fox nickname. I'm messing up that quote. I don't have it memorized completely. But suppose that's where that quote comes from. That's where the Francis Marion gets the nickname of the swamp fox, because he receives orders to come deal with the fighting gamecock Thomas Sumter in the 96 area. So this is just after Fish Dam, November 9th. He's been sent word, and so Tarleton is now returning back, and he gets about November 14th, rides into Winnsboro to get orders from Cornwallis. Now just Tarleton and some of his officers ride into Winnsboro because Cornwallis has ordered him to keep the Legion away from Winnsboro because he knows they like to steal all the food and forage when they go through whatever area they go through. So he orders them to stay well away from Winnsboro, for his army still has forage and food, and only bring in his officers to get commands. So Cornwallis orders Tarleton to take what's left of the 63rd, there's about 80 to 100 men left, and to take his men, the Legion Dragoons, the light infantry, and go deal with Thomas Sumter, who's in the area over here. He switch maps here. So this is a zoomed in image of this area around here. So we get a little closer look at the local area. Again, Blackstock's right here. This is Musgrove Mill right there. So Fish Dam happened here. Tarleton's got orders at Winnsboro over here and begins to lead his men to Shiraz Ferry here on the Broad River. And this ferry here is being guarded by the 1st Battalion of the 71st Fraser Highlanders under a Major MacArthur. And they're guarding the river ford here, and they're patrolling up and down the river to protect the grist mills in the area. Now at this point, Thomas Sumter has still sent all those raiding parties out, and he does not know that Banastre Tarleton is back in the area. He still thinks he's back around Georgetown chasing after Francis Marion. So Tarleton wants to keep the element of surprise. So when they get to Shiraz Ferry, he sends his infantry. Again, at this point, he has about 300 infantry and about 200 mounted men. 200 to 300, depends on which accounts we want to believe or read right now, of mounted men and his one grasshopper cannon. He gets to Shiraz Ferry. The Major MacArthur, there's Patriots watching him on the other side, so they put the two. MacArthur also has a small cannon, and they fire those two cannons across the river, and that drives away the Patriot militia on the other side. At this point, the infantry crosses at Shiraz Ferry. However, Tarleton takes his green dragoons in their green jackets, that everybody knows means Tarleton's in the area when they see this. And he takes them a little bit farther north, hides their green jackets under the red jackets of the 71st, and crosses the river farther north to keep the element of surprise up. However, that same night when they cross the river here, a man from the 63rd deserts from his forces there. And he managed to get to where Thomas Sumter is, and he warns Sumter that Tarleton is in the region and he's coming after him. So Tarleton now knows, or excuse me, Sumter now knows Tarleton is in the area and he's coming after him. So he is operating again, his forces are spread out in between the Tiger and Enoree River. He sends messengers out to all his raiding parties to bring them in and start gathering and to start retreating towards Blackstock and the ford across the Tiger River here. And I'll point out in a minute where everything is oriented here and where the Tiger River is. And they begin to gather his forces and retreat slowly towards Blackstock. Now he can't retreat too fast because he can't abandon all his raiding parties to Tarleton and his dragoons. So he's retreating slowly back, and late in the day of November 20th, 1780, he arrives here at the farm of William Blackstock. He still has a couple raiding parties out and about, and he's left a rear guard at Jones's Ford across the Enoree River, where modern day Jones Bridge is. If you go by where Musgrove Mill is, just down the road from there. He has left the rear guard there under a Georgia captain of the militia, Paddy Carr. And he's there, sit there to watch and see where Tarleton comes from. So this is still midday, November 20th. At this point, the British forces clash with the rear guard at Jones's Ford along the Enoree River. Now, if you read Tarleton's account of the battle there of Jones's Ford, he says he cuts to pieces Sumter's rear guard. However, if you read the accounts from the Patriot side, really it was Paddy Carr, a handful of Patriot militia, and a handful of Loyalist prisoners tied up on horseback. According to the Patriot accounts, as the Legion Dragoons began to charge across the river, Paddy Carr cuts loose his prisoners and retreats with his Patriot forces, and the Legion Dragoons hack down the Loyalist prisoners without asking questions. So in Tarleton's account, he cut to pieces the rear guard. Patriot account, he really killed Loyalist prisoners that they let loose. So it's hard to say, probably a combination of both of those types of things. But the rear guard is pushed back and they retreat back towards Blackstock. Again, it's getting late in the day, November 20th, and Tarleton knows he needs to catch up with Thomas Sumter before he crosses over the Enoree River. So he decides to do the typical Tarleton thing of charging ahead and getting there quickly. So he leaves his infantry and cannon behind and goes forward with just his dragoons and the mounted 63rd, so only his mounted troops. So about this point, about 300 men, he charges forward, chasing after Thomas Sumter because he knows he's somewhere along the Tiger River here and begins to fall back towards here. As he breaks off from his infantry and cannon and leaves them behind, a local woman named Mary Dillard sees this, and she mounts a horse, goes on a shortcut and gets to Blackstock farm here and warns Thomas Sumter before Tarleton gets here. And she tells him that Tarleton is coming, but he left his infantry and cannon behind and is only coming with his mounted troops. With this knowledge, Sumter decides he's going to make a stand right here at the Blackstock farm. And let me explain why he chose here. Now we're going to talk about what it looked like in 1780. So we'll use these maps here. Let me get it in the right direction. Oop, oop. There we go. So this map here is the only known map that anybody's aware of that was drawn. Make sure everybody can see this. Drawn during 1780 by someone that was standing here on the battlefield. It was drawn by Lieutenant McDonald of the 71st, most likely the day after the battle when the 71st arrived here, that he drew this. This was sent to Cornwallis, the letter from Major MacArthur of the 71st, who commanded the 71st, he told Cornwallis that this drawing was pretty near the mark of the battlefield itself. Now, it's not 100% accurate to today's because the man drawing it is not a cartographer. He was an officer making a rough sketch of the battlefield itself. Now, this is the map, all the key points of the map plastered onto a modern GPS image or a modern satellite image of the battlefield here. So this is orient everybody where everything is. So this little hill right here is Monument Hill right over here. This hill right here is the hill right here. The far hill here with the buildings here and where the Blackstock house was is that far hill over there where the trees are. The wagon road is in between this hill and that little dip right through there. And it runs that way, and it runs through here along the tree line over here, that way, and hits the Tiger River. That's where the river ford was. So the river ford right there is right here on the modern map. Again, we're kind of oriented cockeyed here, but Tiger River, again, straight that way. The British line, the far ridge here that you see here, is pretty much straight that way, about 400 yards through the trees. Again, I know we can't walk it today, and that's fine, that's why I'm here, but if you ever walk down there, you can see the dip there, and in 1780, all these trees, again, are not here. So you notice here, this big open flat area is all over there on that side of the hill, and that was all clear cut, and that was where probably the cornfields of the Blackstock family were. So all of that is a big open field. And again, it's hard to tell with the trees, but if you ever walk down there, it is flat as a pancake there. All the way down to the river, all this area right through here where all the trees are is actually really, really flat. It's perfect for fields. So in 1780, all these trees right here would not have been here. In the far ridge there, with all these trees gone, if you stood on that far ridge over there where the British are, and look over here, you can see the entire ridge line up here. And standing here, you can see the ridge all the way over there. And that main road curved and went up to that ridge over here. So the main road, again, we're about right here where this middle dot is. Move this closer for everybody. That main road goes right through here, curves right there, goes up this way, and curves towards the Tiger River that way. So again, this dot and that dot, that dot and that dot, there and there, and the British line is right there. So again, it's not 100% oriented correctly, but it has the main key points of the hills, which are a big thing to pinpoint here. And then the big hill right here is the hill right behind us over here. Again, standing right here, it doesn't seem like a steep hill, but look, when you go up that road, look over to the right and look up, it's a pretty steep hill. If you ever walk it, it's pretty steep. You're out of breath pretty quick. So the big hill is right back here. Now in 1780, the field here was covered by a big rail fence. Very much like the fence you saw at the kiosk at the very beginning here when you're pulling in. And it surrounded the whole field here, went on both sides of the road because there's also a fence on this side of the road, making a big square. And it covered that entire field. So in 1780, you fenced animals out of your field. You wouldn't fence them in. Because majority of the time you let your cattle and pigs wander into the woods and you would gather them for butchering time or to mark what animals. If you've ever seen the movie Old Yeller, part of the scene where he's getting the pigs and marking their ears, that's the reason why. Because pigs are out in the woods, you have to mark your pigs to tell who owns what pig. So it's that type of thing. So you fence the animals out. So there is a big fence in that big open field. There's also a fence running along the edge of the top of the ridge here. So where the houses are on that far hill over here, so right over here, there's a fence going all the way across here, but it stops and goes down the road. So there's a fence on both sides of the roads going all the way down to that ridge where the British are, about 400 yards that way. So there's fences all around both sides, and there's two fences on each side of that road, making kind of a tunnel of that road. Again, these are big fences meant to keep cattle out of fields, so also would keep somebody on horseback out of where you wanted to. They are split fences all the way down and around. Is there any questions about that? I know it's kind of confusing looking at the map and everything. All right, there's no questions about that. So this is the situation we're at. Late in the day, November 20th, 1780. Sumter is here. His forces are on top of the hill, and many of the men are out in that open field starting campfires to cook their afternoon meals. There is a picket, a guard, at the end of the lane at the top of the ridge, 400 yards that way, waiting for the British and watching them to see if they're coming up the road. Again, around late in the day, it's sometimes 1 o'clock, sometimes 4 o'clock, depends on which account, but sometime in the afternoon of November 20th, 1780. The last remaining raiding party under a Colonel Taylor begins to arrive back, pulling wagons full of flour. But then the men here on top of the ridge begin to hear gunfire from the top of the lane. The pickets begin to fire because Tarleton and his dragoons are right behind Colonel Taylor and his wagons. As Taylor and his men come barreling up the road, Tarleton is right behind them, and the pickets fire at him, and they fire back, and the picket begins to fall back, and all the men that are on the open field begin to retreat back up to the top of the hill here. Now Tarleton actually stops at the far ridge, about 400 yards straight that way. Because again, 1780, all these trees are gone. That far ridge, sitting there, he can see the big ridge line here, and can see how steep the hills are. So he does the untypical Tarleton thing, and he waits. He pauses. He doesn't charge in like he usually does. Now Tarleton is well known to charge ahead full bore, and usually that charge wins him the day. Worked at Fishing Creek earlier in the war, and it also worked at Waxhaws. Outnumbered, outgunned, charged in with just his dragoons, and he hacked down the enemy, and they broke and they ran. But how steep these hills are, and the big fences and the buildings here, he sees how formidable those defensive positions are, and he decides he's going to wait. He knows he can't attack up those hills with his dragoons. So again, standing here is not quite as steep, but if you stand at the bottom of that hill there and looked up, you could not imagine trying to get a horse to go up that hill with people firing at it. It's very steep. So he decides he's going to wait on that far ridge, and he's going to wait for his 300 infantry and his cannon to come up. Because he knows he can win if he has his infantry and he have his cannon here to fire at the Patriots. So one second, let me... Maybe not. Nope, never mind. We'll just keep it like that. He knows if he has his cannon and his infantry here, he knows he can set his cannon, even if it's a small 3-pounder, if he sets it on that far ridge, he can pound away at the Patriots on top of the ridge here without risking any of his men, and they'll have to break and retreat because they have no way to respond against that. So Sumter knows this, and he sees Tarleton at the far ridge, so he begins to set up his defensive lines on top of the ridge here. On the far ridge here, again, Monument Hill here, he sets up a Colonel Hill and his men. The far on the other side in the tree there, a Colonel Lacey and some of his men. These are the men right there, right here. General Sumter commands the men on the middle of the ridge here, about where we're standing, and right here across here. Colonel Hampton and his men are set inside the houses here on the far ridge here, again on the far hill there. In front of the houses along the fence there, and some in the open field here, Colonel Twiggs of Georgia and his men and some of the South Carolina militia that are with him are there. And on the far left flank is a Colonel Elijah Clark, his South Carolina and Georgia militia. And on the far hill behind here, Colonel Wynn and his men are set up as a reserve. Then where the Tiger River ford is, all the horses are taken over to the ford under a guard of some accounts say 20, some accounts say 40 men. There's probably a handful of men guarding the horses at the river ford down here. So they're spread out all the way across the ridge line here, along the fences, on top of the ridge here, and all the way across the road and up there. And then Wynn and his men are on the hill right back here. So he spreads out his men, and it's pretty defensible here. His far left flank is covered by the Tiger River, right here. So Tarleton and his men can't loop around that way, there's no way. His other flank is secured by the big hill here behind him. Again, on the far side of the hill, if you ever walk the Palmetto Trail and come up that, it's even steeper on that side. So it's almost impossible to get a horse up there. It'd be very difficult to get men on foot to go up that hill, especially under fire. So his flanks are secured by the mountain over here and the Tiger River over here. So the only way the British can attack is straight on at him. However, he knows that Tarleton is now sitting there waiting for his infantry to come up. So Thomas Sumter knows he can't wait till those infantry and cannon get here, so he knows he has to initiate the attack. So he asks for some volunteers, and about 100 to 150 men volunteer to go down into the open field and attack and fire at the British across the road here, across the ridge there. Now standing here on the right side of the road, Tarleton forms up his Legion Dragoons, the men on horseback, and spreads them out across the road here. So that's this line right here. From this side, the left side of the road over here, the 63rd under a Lieutenant Money dismount and spread out over here. Now, Lieutenant Money is a young officer. He's part of Cornwallis' staff. He's been given command of the 63rd after Major Weems is wounded at Fish Dam Ford. Now, Major Money, Lieutenant Money, this is his first field command. He's one of Cornwallis' favorite young officers. He's being trained and kind of brought up by Cornwallis to become a pretty big deal in the British Army when the general picks you to be on his staff as a young officer. So this is his first field command. However, right before the battle, he is sent a letter by Cornwallis. And he reminds him he's in command of the 63rd. It reminds him to remember that you are an infantry officer. Because remember, what was the mistake that Major Weems made at Fish Dam Ford? He forgot he was using infantry on horseback. You're supposed to dismount to fight. So in Lieutenant Money's mind is that letter from Cornwallis has warned him, pretty much ordered him, told him, remember, you're an infantry officer. Make sure you dismount the 63rd to fight here. So that's what he does. He dismounts the 63rd and he spreads them out across the open field over there on the far side of the hill over here. Now, there's about 100 of the 63rd. Now, they're not fighting shoulder to shoulder right against each other, but at this point in the war, the British have come up with a new tactics to fight against the militia and the Patriot forces, because majority of the time during the war, the British are outnumbered. So they have to extend their line to make sure the Patriots can't get around their flanks. So they're now fighting majority of the time in two lines of British infantry in open order. Usually spread out, and depends on which tactical account you read or which officer is commanding it, roughly from 4 yards between people to up to 10 feet between people. So about from me to the tree line there, in between men, in two lines spread out in open order. And they're spread out over the open field. Again, all the way over there on the modern map, right over here. And these are the men that the Patriots that have went down into the open field began to fire at. Now they go down, all the way down to where the creek is today, which is roughly, that's about right there today. And they go down, again, they're about 100 to 200 yards away from the British line over here, and about 200 yards down the hill from where we are today. And they begin to fire at the 63rd, hoping to antagonize them to advance down the hill to attack them. As this is happening, as they begin to fire at the 63rd, Thomas Sumter orders Colonel Lacey and his men, who are over here at the far flank over there, probably in the wood line over there, to flank around and attack the Legion Dragoons that are sitting on the ridge over there, not doing anything yet. So Lacey and his men sneak through the woods on horseback, get close enough to the 63rd, the Legion Dragoons. Depends on which account. Some accounts say they get pretty close, about 30 yards away, and they open fire, and they kill several of the men and horses, until a Lieutenant Skinner of the Dragoons mounts some of his men and charges at Lacey and his men, and he pushes them back. Now, some of them probably retreated back up to Monument Hill over here, some probably scattered into the woods. A couple of the Patriot accounts say some handful of them stayed in the woods and took pot shots at the Legion Dragoon the rest of the battle. But most of his men got pushed back to the ridge here. As this is happening, the men are still firing at the 63rd here, and Lieutenant Money decides he's going to advance down off the ridge. Because majority of the time the British infantry is fighting, you can see here, with the bayonet on their musket. It's a long triangular metal spike you stick on the end of the musket, turns it into a big spear. Now militiamen on the Patriot side are mostly, since they're volunteer soldiers, most of them are fighting with their American long rifle, their hunting rifle. You can't attach a bayonet to that, so most of them are fighting hand-to-hand combat with a knife or a hatchet or something similar to that. So they have no way really to fight against a bayonet charge. And usually when the British did a bayonet charge, the Patriot militia would break and run. If you think back to the Battle of Camden, the majority of the Patriot militia at Camden, they ran away from just the sight of the bayonet. The British didn't have to fire a shot at them. They saw those bayonets coming at them, and most of them broke and ran off the battlefield. So it's really a big fear weapon when we see that bayonet coming at them. So Money knows this as a good British infantry officer, so he decides he's going to advance down towards the Patriots that are down in the open field and try to push them back. As he begins his advance down, Sumter, who's still standing up here, sees that Lacey and his men have been pushed back. So he sends an order to Colonel Elijah Clark and his Georgia and South Carolina militia to try to flank around the left side of the British over here along the Tiger River to get behind the 63rd and fire at them. And Elijah Clark and his men began to sneak down the banks of the Tiger River over here. There's still trees in 1780 there, and goes down and manages to get about level where the 63rd are. But as they get there, the 63rd Money orders them to advance down the hill. And he begins to advance and push back the Patriots that are in the open field. So as Money is advancing with the 63rd, Elijah Clark and his men are kind of stuck there, because they see they're on the flank, but the 63rd has advanced past them now, and looking across that open field, they see the mounted Legion Dragoons. And Elijah Clark is not a stupid officer. He knows he can't take his militia into the open field, or the Dragoons are going to just charge down and cut them down. So he decides he's just going to wait and see what happens, because he's kind of stuck now behind enemy lines, and he sits there and waits. We'll come back to see what happens to them later on. But now Lieutenant Money is advancing and with the bayonet pushing back the Patriots, and they begin to fall back towards the ridge line here. Now the 63rd and Money still advance. However, as they advance and the Patriots are falling back in front of them, he realizes too late that he has advanced too far into the open field. He gets about where the other side of the creek is here, about 100 to 200 yards down the hill there. And again, can't see it from right here. But if you stood on the edge of the hill right here and looked that way, every person on top of this ridge could see in that open field. So now the 63rd had advanced too far forward, and every rifleman on top of this ridge, even the best shots on top of the hill here, can see them, and they begin to fire at them. And the 63rd becomes pinned down in the big open field over here, because there's nowhere to hide. And all the riflemen are now firing at them from all sides pretty much. At this point, Lieutenant Money is hit and he's mortally wounded and he falls. And two of the other officers in the 63rd, the other remaining officers, are also hit and wounded. So now they are under constant rifle fire from all sides, and all their officers are either killed or on the ground wounded. And they're stuck in that open field. They can't quite retreat because they still have those Patriots out in that top of the ridge here that can attack them if they retreat, and they're kind of pinned down for all the rifle fire. Now all this is happening in that open field. Tarleton and his dragoons are still sitting on top of that ridge. And they are waiting and they're watching to see what happens. It's hard, later on, Tarleton claims that Money and the 63rd disobeyed his orders and advanced too far forward, and he was forced to go and help them. However, it's hard to say when they're that close to each other at the top of the ridge that Tarleton did not have some command over the infantry. The accounts are unclear, but perhaps Tarleton ordered Money to advance, perhaps Money did it by itself. It's unclear in the accounts right now. But Tarleton would blame Money for all things that would happen later on. But as Tarleton sits there and he sees the 63rd, which again are British regular soldiers, pinned down in the open field, and he's seeing all those men being killed, and he sees Money being wounded and falling off down into the field. He's probably thinking in his mind, he just let one of Cornwallis's favorite young officers go into an open field and get himself shot. He also is probably thinking in his mind that the 63rd is a professional British regiment. You can't replace them very easily here in the American colonies. You have to wait for recruits to come shipped over from Great Britain, and that could take months and months. So once you lose British regulars, you can't replace them instantly. They're not like provincial troops, and you can recruit more Americans to fight. The regular British units usually only recruited British soldiers from Great Britain. So he's probably thinking in his mind that he can't abandon the 63rd out in that open field. So he does the typical Tarleton thing, and he orders the dragoons to charge headlong into the Patriot line. Some of the dragoons charge up the open road here, and up the road in the middle of these hills here. But remember, there's those two fences on each side of that road, and it funnels them into that open road, and all these rifles begin to fire at them. And horses began to fall over, men began to block up the road. Some of the Patriot accounts said the bodies of the horses and men were so stacked so high you couldn't cross over them to get up the road. Some of the men, again Mike and I disagree who these men are, but I think some of those men are the dragoons that are straight across here on top of that ridge from Monument Hill. If you walk up to Monument Hill, there is a finger of hill that goes down into the woods. It's not that as steep as everything else over here. Actually, when I need to go down and check things, that's the way I usually walk down that way, because it's nice and shallow to get down. So most likely some of those dragoons charge straight up towards Monument Hill, and some of them find that finger and they circle around and they manage to get to the top of the hill here and push the Patriots that are on top of this hill back to about where we're standing right now. Another reason I think this is, one, we found some archaeological things of British weapons and bullets that have been dropped on top of the hill. So the only way that would happen if they were actually up here. So they had to have got on top of the hill at some point during the battle. And some of the accounts mention that the dragoons get all the way up to the bottom of the hill up here. So those men have circled down and they've pushed these patriots up here, and they begin to push them back up this way. Again, another reason I think, if you stand over here on these hills here, you can see everything that's happening over here. But if you stand on these two hills, you can't see what's happening on the other side of Monument Hill here. So actually, if you circled around there and went up that little finger in the woods there and came up, you're protected from view from everything happening over here. So the riflemen that are standing here can't probably hit the dragoons that are coming up there. But those men have then gone up there and they have pushed those patriots back this way. The dragoons under Bannister Tarleton have crossed the road here, knocked over the fence, and have charged into the open field over here. And they circle in front of the 63rd and protect them with their horses. At this point in the battle, in the open field over here, again, remember Lieutenant Money has been wounded and he's laying in the field. Bannister Tarleton rides up to Lieutenant Money. Now, at this point in the war, pretty much every Patriot soldier in Sumter's army probably knows what Bannister Tarleton looks like. They've probably either seen him or had descriptions of him. So he is riding out in the big open field on the back of his horse, across that open field towards Lieutenant Money. Probably all the riflemen on top of this hill are seeing him, and they're probably now firing at him. So under rifle fire in this open field, he rides up to the wounded Money. He dismounts from his horse. He gets down, grabs the Lieutenant Money, picks him up, throws him on the back of the horse, and remounts on his horse, all under rifle fire, and begins to lead the 63rd in a retreat back towards the road there. As they retreat back towards the road, the 63rd is up here. It is now not quite that far, sorry, about right here on the road here, about down the hill over here. And some of the 63rd are setting up a line of defense here and firing up the road to stop any Patriots from chasing after them. Lieutenant Skinner of the British Dragoons has set up a defense of the 63rd, some of their infantry, and they're firing volley after volley up the road, trying to make sure nobody comes after them, protecting everybody as they retreat down the road. Now, as these British Legion Dragoons that have crossed the hill over here, they're probably not advancing very fast because they probably see everybody else running away, but they're up here on top of the hill, they see all the Patriots up here and then the houses there, so they're probably slowly advancing to see what happens as they come up here. But as they're advancing up this way, probably about where we're standing here, remember Colonel Wynn and his men are on reserve on top of the hill here. And they haven't fired too many shots. And Colonel Wynn, according to his account, has ordered them all to sit down and hold their fire. He waits till those dragoons get close enough to the hill here, and he orders his men to stand up at once, fire a volley down at them, and yell at the top of their lungs and charge down towards the dragoons here. And as those men began to charge down the hill here, they pushed those dragoons back down the hill. So now the entire British forces are all retreating back towards the ridgeline where they began. Get this. So they are now all retreating back down the roads this way. Now, let's get back to where Colonel Elijah Clark and his men are. Now remember, they've circled around and they're about level where the 63rd was, but as the battle progresses, they get stuck behind enemy lines. But as they're stuck there, they see the dragoons charge down the ridge also. And now there's no one there around them. And they are looking across the open field, and they are seeing the horses of the 63rd just sitting there with nobody watching them. So Elijah Clark and his men, remember, horses are very hard to find in the backcountry of South Carolina at this point. He decides to lead his men out from cover, and they began to steal the 63rd's horses. But when they get to the horses, begin to grab what horses they can, everything on top of the ridge is happening, and the British begin to retreat down the road straight at them. So now Clark and his men are looking up the road, and they're seeing the entire British force, 63rd, the Legion Dragoons, are running probably full speed down the road straight at them. So they grab as many horses as they can, they mount up, they let loose any of the other horses that they can scare away, and they begin to retreat down the road in front of the British. And the British are following them up the road. As their British are retreating down the road, the Patriots on top of the hill here began to chase after them. At this point in the battle, again, part of the 63rd is still covering the retreat, firing up the hill here. Thomas Sumter and some of his staff officers are probably in between the two ridges here on top of the road, roughly about right here, just right over there. and they're standing there seeing what's happening. And the 63rd and the men that are firing see that group of officers, and they aim at them and they fire a volley at them. As they're doing this, most likely the officers turn away because a bullet hits Thomas Sumter through the shoulder, and it rides around and lodges against his spine. He doesn't cry out, he doesn't scream, he doesn't fall on the ground. Only reason they know he's wounded, one of his officers sees his sword hand fall to the ground, and he sees blood run down. And he orders one of his officers to grab his sword, put it in his scabbard, and make sure he doesn't fall over. And they grab him and they take him into the house where a doctor will operate on him during the battle and dig out that bullet from against his spine. At this point in the battle, since Sumter is wounded and out of the fight, the command goes to the next highest ranking officer, a Colonel Twiggs of Georgia. And Twiggs has ordered the men to push against the British and push them off the battlefield. And they begin to chase them down the road. However, they don't advance too far. They stop where the battle begins, at the far edge of the lane where the British hill is, the ridge line is. About, again, 400 yards straight this way. So they have pushed them off the battlefield, but they have stopped at that ridge. And the British retreat about 4 to 5 miles down the road where they run into their infantry and cannon that are coming up. However, it's now late in the day and the sun has went down. So Tarleton and his men decided to set up camp about 4 or 5 miles away from here, up the road. And Elijah Clark and his men, who are retreating in front of the British that are running from the battlefield here, as they retreat away, they see the campfires and of the advancing infantry. And they see that, they break off the road, and they will circle around and cross the Tiger River farther south of here. Yep, get that right. South of here, cross around and rejoin what's left of Sumter's forces later on the next day. Now, the British have been pushed off the battlefield, and Colonel Twiggs is now in command. He has ordered all his men to again stop the chase at the edge of the lane, and he begins to order his men back up to the ridge here, and he orders them to gather all the wounded from both sides and bring them up to the house to be taken care of. So they're gathering all the British and Patriot wounded. The majority of them are British wounded though. And they bring them up to the house over there to be taken care of. Colonel Twiggs also knows that the next day Tarleton is going to come back, and he's going to have his infantry and cannon with him. So he knows he can't stand really against a full frontal British infantry attack with full forces, with about even forces with him. So he knows this, and he knows he has to retreat. So he orders his men to build up their campfires to make it look like they're still here, and he orders everybody to cross the Tiger River, and once they get across the Tiger River, they're split up and they follow their different colonels in different directions, and they scatter. At this point, Thomas Sumter has had that bullet taken away from his spine, and he is suspended between 2 horses on a green cowhide of a freshly killed cow. They spread the skin out between 2 horses, laid him on there, and they took him across the Tiger River. So imagine just having spinal surgery pretty much and being bounced up and down on a cowhide between 2 horses and crossing a river doing it. And some of his men escort him back pretty much to the North Carolina, South Carolina border. He'd be moved around for multiple months as he recovered. But Twiggs and has ordered everybody to scatter, and all the different militia begins to break apart and go their separate directions. The next morning, Bannister Tarleton returns to the battlefield with all his forces, what's left of his mounted troops and his infantry now, and he sees that the Patriots have run away. So in his report, he claims that he won the battle because he held the field the next day. Now in Patriot accounts, they claim they won the battle because they drove the British off the battlefield. They also would kill more of the enemy. For the Patriots, they only lost about 3 men killed, 4 to 12 wounded, again on accounts which one. Again, mainly because they're on top of a hill, behind fences, behind trees, behind buildings, and they're in an easily defended position. They have cover to hide behind. The British have lost between, again, depends on which accounts you read, between 90 to 100 men, roughly. Most British accounts actually mention that the 63rd lost at least a third of their privates, and all their officers are killed or wounded. Again, not a huge number, but out of 100 men, that's a pretty significant amount. Tarleton, again, will claim in his report that he lost less men than that, and he only lost about 40 men and lost 30 horses. So in his report, he also claims that he killed 100 of the enemy and 3 of their colonels, which is he pretty much lies in his account. because one thing, Patriots are well known and reports the spread out. If somebody dies on the battlefield, especially a colonel, they let everybody know because they brag about it because he's a good commanding officer. Americans don't hide the fact when colonels or officers are killed on the battlefield. They let it be well known that he sacrificed his life for the cause, pretty much. So there's no accounts that match up with Tarleton's account of the casualties, but there's many accounts that match up to the Patriot accounts of the casualties. So a significant amount of Tarleton's forces are killed or wounded here. Now Tarleton, when he comes up to the battlefield the next morning, he sees all the wounded and everything here. He sends back to Sherrall's Ferry, where the 71st is, under Major MacArthur. He sends a messenger back to bring up their wagons and supplies and send another doctor to help take care of the wounded. And the 71st began to send some of their men escorting the wagons up to the Blackstock plantation here. And most likely this is when Lieutenant McDonald of the 71st drew his map of the battlefield. That's speculation on my part, can't prove it 100%, but most likely this is the time when he did that. As that is happening, Tarleton does the Tarleton thing, and he charges ahead, and he leaves his infantry here to take care of the wounded, takes what's left of his dragoons, and crosses the Tiger River and chases after the scattered Patriot forces. Again, he claims he captures and cuts to pieces some of the retreating groups and takes prisoners to send on to 96. If you read Patriot accounts of that, many of them claim that he just found whatever local people he could and had them arrested and said, "You are a prisoner from the Battle of Blackstock." So again, who to believe, who's accurate, it's not 100%, but most likely it's a combination of those ideas. He probably ran into some of the small groups that couldn't get away quick enough. He also probably built up his prisoner numbers by just grabbing whoever he could to make it look better for him. So as that is happening, so technically, at the end of the battle, it is a Patriot victory. Bannister Tarleton is driven off the field. He loses more men. Again, the battle is not to hold the battlefield, really, it's how many enemy are killed. So he loses too many men to make it a victory, great victory for him. However, the Patriots can claim a major victory because they've driven him off the battlefield and killed more of his men. Now, tactically, in the overall picture, it is technically a victory for Bannister Tarleton because he is ordered by General Cornwallis to take away the threat of Thomas Sumter from 96. And he does do that. He wounds Sumter here and he scatters his militia. However, he loses too many men doing it. And also he loses too many horses. There's a whole bunch of different letters in between him and Cornwallis. That Cornwallis is happy about the victory, but he wished it wasn't so costly. Because again, he can't replace those killed and wounded men of the 63rd very easily. And really, the British Army can't replace all the horses he lost here either, because horses are so scarce. After this battle here at Blackstock, there's orders from Cornwallis to discontinue mounting British infantry units. He says, stop doing it. Take all their horses and give their horses to what's left of the Legion Dragoons because they need more horses. So this is kind of the nail in the coffin in Cornwallis's eye of using mounted infantry with British regulars. Fish Dam Ford was the first failure, and then here at Blackstock he lost all those men here. He decides not to do that anymore. Now, again, why is the Battle of Blackstock such an important thing? Why do we preserve it? Why do we tell the story here? One big thing is you have the big names here at the battle. You have Thomas Sumter, Bannister Tarleton. Everybody knows who they are. If you don't know them, they are directly, you probably heard of the Fighting Gamecock, the nickname of Thomas Sumter, or you've seen caricatures of Bannister Tarleton in different movies. Have you ever seen the movie The Patriot? Colonel Tavington, the big British bad guy, is based off of Tarleton. So everybody has heard about these people, even if you don't know much at all about the Revolutionary War. So this is really one of the many clashes that they have, but one of the many clashes where Thomas Sumter comes out on top. Another reason is right after the next major battle after here, as we talked about earlier, is the Battle of Cowpens, which is going to happen a couple months later. Now, this is a lot of speculation from historians and different things, so we can't prove it 100%. But if you look at battles before Blackstock, Tarleton attacked first, asked questions later, and it always worked out for him. Fishing Creek, the Waxhaws, different other things, little things in between. He always charged in with his dragoons and always broke the enemy, even when outnumbered and outgunned. The next thing that happens is Blackstock, November 1780, and he does the opposite thing. He waits. He kind of pauses and waits till all his forces are here. And his idea is to attack with everybody, and it didn't work out for him. He lost the battle. The next battle that happened is Cowpens, and he's chasing after Daniel Morgan and the Continental Army there. And this is also officers in his army after the defeat there are complaining about this. The fact is they're tired. They've been marching all night pretty much. A lot of their soldiers don't have shoes anymore. They've been marching and chasing after Daniel Morgan. It's still cold, they're hungry, and he doesn't wait and gather his forces and forms up his line. He attacks them. As the men come up, he orders them to attack across the field at Cowpens. Now there's speculation that he's thinking in his mind probably, it didn't work at Blackstock, so I'm not going to make that same mistake here. I'm going to charge in, and that's the bad thing to do there. And he forces they attack, they get pushed in and surrounded by Daniel Morgan, and they are completely defeated. And the entire light companies and his whole force is pretty much killed or captured there at Cowpens. And he only gets away with some of his dragoons. Again, most of this is speculation because Tarleton never writes down what he was thinking at that point. Most of his accounts, he blames other people for his failures. So here at Blackstock, he blames money for the attack. He didn't want to attack, but in his letter to Cornwallis, he claimed that money advanced too far and he had to go in and save him. That's what happened. And then at Cowpens, he blames that his infantry just wouldn't stand and fight. He blamed it on the common soldier, but he managed to run away with his dragoons. At the end of the Battle of Cowpens also, his dragoons refused to charge in at the Continentals and the Patriots that were attacking him. It was the first time really any accounts mention that the dragoons refused to attack. Even with Tarleton standing there yelling at them to charge in with them. Again, this is a lot of speculation. There's a whole bunch of different things why this happened, but one thing is, remember the last battle the dragoons were ordered to charge was here at Blackstock. And what happened? They got funneled in a big narrow road, got massacred there, and got shot down as they tried to charge up the hill. So again, there's speculation of perhaps the dragoons are thinking back that last time you just told us to charge against the impossible odds, a lot of us got killed. So we're not going to make that mistake again at Cowpens. So again, we're getting into speculation about why that's important, but there's a lot of evidence kind of pushing in those types of directions. Another thing is that here at the Battle of Blackstock, Thomas Sumter is wounded, and he's out of the war for a couple months. Again, we get into some speculation here, but Thomas Sumter was well known not to get along with different officers, especially with the Continental Army. He's not unique in this by any means. A lot of the officers on both sides were constantly jockeying for who's going to be above the other. So again, there's speculation of he wouldn't have got along very well with Daniel Morgan, who commanded the army at Cowpens. The fact that he was wounded here and then Colonel Andrew Pickens could take command of the militia at Cowpens was actually a blessing in disguise for the Patriots. The fact that he was out of the war for a short time here allowed Pickens to take over and push, and Daniel Morgan will get along with Pickens and persuade the militia to stand and fight at Cowpens, and led to the victory there. So again, even though it was a Patriot victory here, they did have to retreat and they did have to scatter their forces. The British did hold the line here, but they lost so many men and horses that the victory was pretty much mute. The idea of a victory. So any questions? I know that was a lot.
So
we're under about an hour. So
the lion's share of the British casualties were right over that hill there in the bottoms of the 63rd.
Yep, in this big open field, right over there. And again, a lot of times today when people come here, they see the open field right now in the moat area, and they think this is what the battlefield was in 1780. So there is some writings and things, secondary sources from historians that place things pretty much in the open fields here where things are happening. But if you read the primary sources, you look at the maps and things, majority of the infantry fighting is happening in that far open field over there. And we're working real hard to get archaeology and things to cover that and look at that. Because there's been some archaeological things done here, but it was all done here in this open field with little few things scattered around. And again, we're working with American Battlefield Trust and different groups to do those types of things.
So if and when you do archaeological survey and a dig, is that done through the state, or do y'all work with the university, or how does that happen?
The State Park Service has a state archaeologist, and she is in charge of that. I think a lot of times she either contracts out with different groups, or she'll, like university and classes like that. So it'll be a combination of things, I think.
Any chance for volunteers to help?
Most likely, but I can't guarantee that. I don't know what their rules are with that.
We'll just need to stay in touch, won't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. The British Legion, again, dumb question. all British, no loyalists, local loyalists?
So the British Legion are, even though they're called the British Legion, are provincials. So they're mostly
they are provincials. Okay.
Americans. There's some British officers and things with them. And they come from mostly the New York, New Jersey area.
Okay. Okay.
But by this point in the war, they've kind of combined, and he's recruiting wherever he can. There's also some prisoners from like Camden and things that have joined up with the British, with the provincials, but not a huge amount. And they're kind of questionable, the loyalties. There's different accounts of a lot of desertions from that group. We'll join up just to get away, and then once they got in the open, they kind of just disappeared.
Abscond into the map. Patriot forces, no artillery whatsoever.
No artillery. Majority of them had rifles, probably a scattering of muskets, and some old swords and things. But majority, we're all riflemen.
What did you find here? What was some of the things that you said you'd found?
So the archaeologists who did the study here found several fired and unfired musket and rifle balls, some musket parts, some rifle things, some metal tack from horses and things, several nails and things on this hill and the far ridge there, where the houses most likely were. So there's...
What building was here?
It's hard to say. Probably some outbuildings or barns. Later on, there's other maps from the early 1800s that show different barns and small buildings here, but it's not clear what it was here during 1780.
There been a building on Monument Hill?
So, as far as I know, nothing's ever been found on Monument Hill that actually was the building. So, most likely it was this open hill like it shows on the map here.
Any graves on the site?
Not that we know of.
Oh,
Okay.
So there's most likely the British dead were buried here somewhere. We just never found it yet. Maybe one day. There's speculation of different places throughout history.
More than likely, they would have been buried either on or near the battlefield.
Yeah. Maybe in the open field, maybe up farther up from the field. We usually don't want to bury people in where you're going to plow. So there's a lot of speculation, but nothing ever concrete.
Yeah. I'd bury them on top of the hill, so I do.
Is there no other questions? I do have another thing that this gentleman here brought to me earlier. Sorry, I forgot to pull it out when I was talking about it.
Right.
But there's different images. Can you remind me who drew this painting?
Is Steve Noons. He's actually from Great Britain, and he took the Gilberts, the folks that wrote the book, sent him a narrative, I guess, or a depiction of what happened, and that's a painting that he did. It's online, Steve Noon, but he's from Great Britain. Never been to the United States.
Yeah, it's a very interesting image. I wouldn't say it's 100% accurate.
No.
But it's pretty good characteristic, because I don't think the British infantry got quite as far as the top of the ridge here. They're probably down on the hill, but it's a good one picture thing of showing things. Mostly the accounts of the buildings mention that they are log buildings. That's about the only description we have from primary sources from the battle time.
I think I read where they were not chinked. They could fire through the...
Maybe some of the barns weren't.
Yeah.
But probably the house where the cabin... One other later description describes it as a two-building cabin with a breezeway in between.
Right.
So there's probably some barns too, because you got to store your crops and things. Much later accounts mention tobacco barns, but no primary sources from the actual time period mention that.
Excuse me, I thoroughly enjoyed that. I'm going to join this group over here because I wanted to see.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you very much, though. It was
Thank
great.
you. But from primary sources from the period of men that stood here and fought during the battle, all they mention is log buildings. So
And they occupied those buildings.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, the McDonald map here only shows buildings on that far hill there.
Well, they refer to it as a blockhouse, and a blockhouse is just basically a fort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was actual technical fort, but
They use it like a blockhouse.
Well, it's a British guy who's doing this.
Yeah, he's probably an officer just here one day, rough sketching it, and
he's probably
that's
rattling
terminology.
from the previous day's victory.
Yeah. But
Well,
again,
it makes it look like you're taking a stronger position if you say blockhouse.
that too.
Yeah.
And also the fence they use is the best defensive thing you can have.
Yeah.
Again, and he brought several copies here, so if anybody would like to take one. All right. I think we can.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. I didn't catch your name earlier. I'm sorry.
Jerry Williams.
Jerry Williams. Thank you
Thanks,
for
Jerry.
bringing these in. So again, if anybody would like a copy of this, feel free.
How did you spell
Sure.
that man's name that drew that?
Steve Noon.
N-O-O-N?
Yes, ma'am.
And he took that from what book?
I have the book in the car, but it's I don't recall the name of it, but I can show it to you before I leave.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
it's
you can see the
family, a man and his wife named
greens in
Gilbert.
the background.
Gilbert.
Yeah, artistic license jams everybody in so you can actually put the green
Yeah.
jackets and the red jackets on.
I understand why he did it, but yeah, just keep in mind what it would have looked like in 1780.
Yeah.